Oh, shoot. Okay, good thing. Stop. Don't touch anything. Okay, now you can mute yourself.
Why would I want to mute myself?
Mute yourself now.
The Pope is here. I love that.
Hey, he always wants to hear what you have to say, Dan. And Norm, I'm sure you're on the list too. So.
Well, I don't know which list I'm on though.
Yeah, probably all of them. I like the fan coming out of Dan's head. That's a really nice approach.
It's the function of his genius. It's actually just a turning wheel.
It's Inspector Gadget, I think.
I feel like he can't hear us. He should be laughing.
Dan, it looks like you're wearing a propeller hat.
I don't think he can hear us.
Oh, he can't?
Sure you can. Yeah.
I can hear you now. I'm sorry for the, I'm a technical ignoramus, as you know, and my son Adam is riding shotgun here, working out the glitches. He's right beside, you can't see him. There he is. Yeah, he's ensuring that I don't mess up too badly. But we'll wait another minute or two for all the panelists to get here. And
Stop that.
mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, I think that's on. Stop that. Stop.
Okay. Aaron, let in Erin Rentschler. She's important.
Yeah, I know. And
Are you keeping a guest list? Are you turning people away? Like,
No, but we can't have everyone's screen illuminated because we just, in order to accommodate everyone and ensure the sort of the quality of transmission, we have to turn some.
we can't. Everyone's
Screens
video
off.
can't be on.
Yeah.
Everyone's audio.
oh, okay.
That's the deal. Yeah.
Yeah. But I see Fred Evans is out there. Hi, Fred.
Yeah.
Ian Edwards is there. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Dan.
We're going to turn your audio off soon, Ian. We're working on it because we're trying to ensure the quality of transmission. I'll make an announcement soon. Oh, Yusef is here.
Yep.
Good.
Yes, I heard you say the video should be off. Should I turn mine off?
No, please don't.
Panelists, video and audio on. Other folks, if you have questions, respond in the chat. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll say more about that momentarily. Oh, it's just gone 1 o'clock.
So yeah, that's great. People are still coming.
People are still coming in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. We're now up to 41.
Okay.
Lovely. Thank you for your patience, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more people to arrive and then we'll get started. Matt has arrived, but he's under Sherry.
Yeah.
Matt, you're not Sherry.
No, I don't know. Sherry was used this a while ago. I keep changing the name to me, and it doesn't work. It wants Sherry back, and not me.
Okay.
So.
You know, once you've been married long enough, you're one person.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what she did to permanently change the name to Sherry. So.
You know, if you click on it right now, it'll.
All right. Yeah. Click on the name.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There it is. Rename. All
but
right.
it may just pull you right back to Sherry. I don't know.
Well, no, it does change temporarily, but then it reverts back the next time. But at least this time, people will know my name. So
I'm going to start in in 3 minutes or 4 minutes. Okay, folks, people are still filing in, metaphorically speaking. So I'm going to wait another 3 minutes and then we'll make an official start. 3 minutes. Shalom, Daphna.
who is owner's iPad? I have to.
No idea. No idea.
If I'm not mistaken, isn't that our famed brother, Ricky? Ricky's not owner, Norm?
That should be him.
Okay.
Mr. Ricky, if that
He is the owner.
yeah.
We're up to 54 participants, 2 minutes after.
That's a great turnout. My goodness.
Yeah, that's really nice. Good job, guys.
Yeah.
They were expecting your wife. They're going to be very disappointed.
I'm disappointed.
Well, so am I, but I wasn't gonna, get into it.
I have to remember that. I have to change the name each and every time something happened. I'll blame her.
Okay. So, are we ready to roll, do you think?
Probably.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Daniel Burston, and I'll be moderating today's panel. Beside me is my son and riding shotgun for technical glitches. His name is Adam. He's a longtime associate of Norms. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an associate professor of psychology at Duquesne University and a longtime member of Duquesne's Social Justice Committee, which is co-sponsoring today's panel with the Day of Learning and Speaking Out. But before we get started on the official business of the panel, there's a few things that I want to say by way of providing some historical perspective. 155 years ago today, General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and informed the local residents of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which set all slaves free. The African-American community in Galveston turned this into a local holiday, and it wasn't until 1979 that the state of Texas transformed it into a statewide holiday, known as Juneteenth. Other states eventually followed suit, and now 47 states in all mark this day annually as a celebration for the renewal of hope. But celebrations are difficult to sustain or to engage in times of deep unrest, and the United States is now in the midst of a deep crisis, a crisis of confidence, of leadership, of ethics and values, and a crisis of faith in our ability to live up to the basic promise of equality, full equality, including equality before the law. Now, on a personal note, I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, and I only began teaching at Duquesne in 1992. 1 year after my arrival here, I had the pleasure of teaching a gifted young man by the name of Paul Schulo II. In addition to being extremely bright, polite, and presentable, Paul was an excellent hockey player and a natural-born leader, someone whose kindness and community spirit inspired trust and admiration among his peers. Paul joined the Pittsburgh police force towards the end of 2007, and merely 18 months after joining the department on April 4th, 2009, was gunned down along with two other officers, Stephen Maley and Eric Kelly. And the only justification that his killer, Richard Poplaski, gave for the drunken rampage that took Paul's life was his fear that Obama, as he put it, Obama is going to take away all our guns. Now, when this tragedy occurred, I was chair of the psychology department, and to honor Paul's memory, I created an annual award in his name, which is bestowed each year by the McAlister College of Liberal Arts on undergraduates who perform exemplary community service. And we mark this occasion with an annual luncheon and a memorial for the winner of the award and for Paul Schulo's parents, two of the nicest human beings I've ever met. Now, fast forward to the summer of 2014 and the killings of Eric Garner and Michael Brown. Ferguson, Missouri is up in flames, and the nation is convulsed in demonstrations and heated discussions about race and policing, about issues of mass incarceration, and Black Lives Matter is now 1 year old. This is when we start hearing calls from the African-American community for the abolition of the police. Now, with the help of Lena Dostilio, who directed Duquesne's Center for Community Engaged Teaching and Research, I hastily assembled a group of colleagues, graduate students, activists, and the mayor of Wilkinsburg and several community partners to participate in a day-long symposium known now as a Day of Learning and Speaking Out. This was convened to address these very issues, and since then, the Day of Learning and Speaking Out has become an annual event at Duquesne, and would have had its 6th iteration this March if the COVID epidemic hadn't forced us to cancel the event. But more importantly, at least for our purposes, since the summer of 2014, when we convened the first iteration of the Day of Learning and Speaking Out, I have watched with horror and disbelief as the list of African-American men, women, and children killed by white police officers has grown steadily. Yet sadly, calls for better police recruitment and training, for civilian oversight, and so on seem to fall on deaf ears because they meet with stiff resistance from the Fraternal Order of Police and local police unions. As their resistance stiffens, and as the death toll rises, calls for the abolition of police become angrier, more emphatic, and more widespread. Far more widespread now than they were merely 6 summers ago. Why? I submit that quite simply it's because in communities of color, trust in the integrity and the impartiality of police is at an all-time low or simply non-existent, having vanished in 2014, if not 2 decades before. Remember Rodney King? Moreover, trust in the integrity of police procedure and attitudes towards minorities is plunging precipitously amongst white people now too. As a result, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are finding more and more white people who are shocked and indignant at the treatment they receive and who offer them their vigorous support on the streets, in the media, in big corporations and tech companies, and yes, in our universities and schools as well. Well, I am not an expert in this field. I suspect that many police officers still believe that if they persevere just long enough and resist major reforms, they'll be able to maintain the status quo indefinitely. If so, I beg them to reconsider. The status quo is not only morally unacceptable, it's now completely unsustainable. Indeed, I shudder to think of the longer term consequences, not just for communities of color, but for all of us, the entire country, if police unions persist in resisting calls for reform and change. If this trend continues, however things may unfold, none of us will be safe anymore, regardless of the color of our skin. Hence today's panel. Okay, just a few technicalities before we turn to our panelists. We have a fairly large turnout today, some 67 people so far, and more may follow soon. So because of that and the urgency of the issues we're addressing, we've muted your microphones and turned off your video cameras for most of you, not the panelists, but most of the rest of you. I apologize for any inconvenience this poses. But if you want to convey any comments or questions to me, feel free to do so on the chat line. I'll relay some of them to our panelists toward the end of our session when their presentations are finished. When you do write your chat comments or questions, please indicate whether they're directed to a specific panelist or to all the panelists at once, okay? Okay, now with that out of the way, I would like to turn to our panel. Panelists, would you please introduce yourselves? Let's start with Elaine. Elaine Franz.
Hello, I'm Elaine Franz. I am a professor of history at Kent State University and have been actively working with issues relating to policing and criminal justice and racial justice for many years.
Hello, my name is Yusef Jones. I frame my activism as a foot soldier. I've been doing this a fairly long time. I've been engaged in the criminal justice system, both as a prisoner and as an advocate for social justice. And my first encounter with social activism was the death of Martin Luther King. And my reaction essentially landed me in prison. But having touched both sides of this equation, I think that I bring some unique insights into the prisoner perspective.
Matt?
Hello, I'm Matt Schneirov. I'm on the sociology faculty with Norm, and I teach courses on social movements and have written about social movements of various kinds, and courses on race and racism, minorities and public policy. And I don't pretend to be an expert on this topic, but I'm very happy to be on the panel and to be invited to be on the panel. So thank you.
Lenny.
Good afternoon, I'm Lenny McAlister. I'm Director of Western Pennsylvania for the Commonwealth Foundation. I have been involved in dealing with police and community interactions for quite some time, whether it's been in my role with media or been in my role with Commonwealth Foundation or some of the institutions that I've worked with. I have worked both with conservative organizations as well as with Rainbow Push Coalition. So it gives me an opportunity to have a very unique perspective on the different types of approaches that different types of organizations are taking in order to resolve the issues that are facing us even today.
Norm.
My name is Norman Conti. I'm a professor in the Department of Sociology at Duquesne University. I've been working with and near the police for over 20 years, and I've been working with men incarcerated in various facilities and folks back out on the street for over 13 years. I'm happy to be here.
All right, well then let's get started. Our first presenter is going to be Elaine Franz.
Set my timer here. Hi, everyone. Hello. I know many of you out there. So today what I want to do is bring a historical perspective to issues of policing in Pittsburgh. I'm currently working on the history of policing in Pittsburgh, so it makes it pretty easy for me to talk about that. And particularly I want to think about the question of how in this historical moment, this moment of Black Lives Matters, how is it that we can learn from this deeper history, productive lessons in what needs to happen for policing to improve or change or transform or go away or whatever needs to happen to policing. What can we learn from our historical precedents about how we got here and maybe how we can move on. Okay, so so in this moment of Black Lives Matter, many white Americans who have carefully and actively avoided thinking about how our police and our courts and prisons, though this will not be what we're focusing on today, work, have awakened and realized that there are some real serious problems to be addressed. We are shocked to learn about the injustices and violence of the system, of our system. Why has no one told us about this earlier? There are groups, however, who are not at all shocked. And two of those groups that stand out are most people who are heavily policed, most relevantly right now, Black Americans, but there's other groups as well, right, who are heavily policed. And they're not surprised to learn about this. And police themselves, right, are not surprised to learn about many of the things that are coming new to us right now. Rather, they're shocked that we're shocked. We've not only been tolerating, but in fact supporting and insisting upon this violence for years. Now, thankfully, we all have a window in which many white people are looking critically about what we have asked our police to do and how they do it. And we don't like what we see. But if we're going to fix it, we're going to have to understand the longer history of how we got here and what the powerful in our community built the police to do. So policing in Pittsburgh has been through many different iterations. The Pittsburgh police have been reformed, restarted from scratch, rebooted, regulated, many times, usually in response to moments like this. But Pittsburgh police took most elements of its modern form during the reorganization in the late, I'm gonna go way back here, 1880s, okay? So between 1886 to 1889, the police implemented physical and moral criteria for the hiring of new police for the first time, required character references for police, and they proclaimed their intention to fire policemen who they deemed incompetent, brutal, or corrupt. So that's a pretty reasonable reform. They replaced most existing patrolmen in those years, fired most of them and rehired fresh new ones. And they increased the number of patrolmen for the city to 157. They introduced the first police matrons, police women. They began to drill their police in a paramilitary fashion to bring order and structure and discipline to the police itself. They hired a boxing trainer and his gym to keep the men in boxing condition, because they were largely going to be fighting with their hands, right? Though they were armed, most of them were armed. They developed a new manual outlining police duties and practices for the first time. They installed call boxes, which meant that police patrolmen could call in when they needed assistance instead of having to find other people in the area to help them out when they were trying to arrest someone or intervene in a conflict. They also purchased the first police wagons so that they could carry people to prison or to jail instead of frog marching them or putting them in wheelbarrows. They began keeping thorough statistics on their activities and publishing them in annual reports. Okay, so in many ways, actually, this is the moment, this reform was the moment when we get our modern police in its relatively current form. Okay, a lot of stuff changes since then, right? We get cars, different kinds of weapons, things like that. But basically, this is when our police takes its current form. Yeah, it was clear from the beginning that policing Pittsburgh would never be an easy job. If you don't believe me, listen to the first director, J.O. Brown. He's the first director of safety, and he carefully explained in Pittsburgh's first annual report in 1889 why the new police department he was launching would always disappoint. He says, "Human nature is much the same, no matter what occupation in life one follows. Mistakes or outbursts of passion, indulgence in vitiated tastes may be condoned or pardoned in other people, but the errors and faults of policemen are almost unpardonable. The faults of a good citizen are often quickly overlooked, but the sins of a policeman never. He must protect the property and lives of his fellow citizens, and he's liable to be shot or stabbed every time he makes an arrest. He's looked upon many as fair and legitimate prey for all toughs and roughs who may choose to assault him, and all resistance by him is called brutality. He must be gentle and dove-like, while being as bold as a lion. He must be subject to the whims of the politicians or the ward bosses and the ward bummers. He must obey all the dictates of the councilmen of his ward. In short, he must serve the Lord and the devil jointly. He must control his appetites and passions, be polite and courteous to all, and respect the dignity and power of the law. His violation of ordinary municipal statutes are deemed tenfold more reprehensible in him than in other citizen." And he ends, "While men are men, violations of rules and regulations, as well as of the law, must ever be expected." Now he's engaging in some apologetics here. He's very defensive. And interestingly, he's defensive of the future mistakes that he knows his police are going to make and the future sins he knows they're going to commit. He's explaining why they're definitely going to be engaged in police brutality, right? And he's the guy who sets up the system. He's our guy, who's hired to do this. And so it's set from the very beginning. It was very clear that police brutality was an unavoidable and a necessary thing that police was choosing, that we were choosing to engage in when we set up the police as we did. The problem with policing, as Brown accurately predicted, is inherent in its structure and function. Since the 1880s, Pittsburgh police have gone through many, many changes, of course, but one thing has remained the same. Police in Pittsburgh, as elsewhere, have always been tasked with using or threatening violence to keep the peace. And this really has two different components that I think it's worthwhile thinking about. One of them is police are intended, and always have been, to use their capacity for violence to protect the interests of whatever groups hold political and economic power from individuals or groups who are challenging that power. And this is often the case, even though many thoughtful people doubt the justice of the elite's position. And it's also the case that elites often explicitly deny that they want violence to be used to protect their interests. Okay, so the police are actually, their job, what they're paid to do, what they're always structured to do, is protect the interest of whoever it is who's in charge from from anybody who's challenging those interests, even though the people in charge have then the leisure to say, oh, we would hate for anybody to use violence on our behalf. And they constantly say that. They are hiring the police and structuring them so that they will do that. And they have been from the beginning, okay? And the second thing that the police are charged to do is to use their capacity for violence. And whatever additional skills they manage to, scramble together, but they're not really given other tools in any substantial way, to address anything that Pittsburgh leadership defines as social problems that they do not figure out how to resolve through peaceful means. So whenever there's a problem and Pittsburgh's powers that be decide that they aren't going to invest in solving that problem or anything they defined as a problem, whether it should be a problem or not, Pittsburgh police are called upon to solve that problem. They've been asked in this, over history to address everything from the ridiculous to the deadly serious, right? From the banana peel menace, for real, to dangerous motorists, to people with highly contagious diseases, to men whittling threateningly on streets, to cat collars, flashers, rabid dogs, lost children, dangerous industrial equipment, failing infrastructure, firecrackers, festive gunfiring, fetid corpses, animal cruelty, property crimes, bar fights, serial killers. Whenever there's a problem that people don't quite know how to handle and don't want to invest in handling it through peaceful means, they throw the police at them. American history being what it is, this has often but not always taken the form of white on black violence. Black people were not the first identifiable group to pose a real challenge to Pittsburgh's powerful classes, but it often is the case that that the police are used specifically to protect white interests and elite white interests, particularly against the sort of menace of black threat to that authority. The first police are actually set up. The first several decades, the police are really set up to police labor, right? And labor unions, labor strikes. And in fact, when we talked about Police J.O. Brown, who was the guy we quoted at the beginning, that whole police reboot that they did at the end of the 1880s is meant to more effectively control labor. They were sent out to suppress strikes. And particularly in 1877, many people already know, but Pittsburgh didn't have enough police to suppress a labor strike, and the strikers, took over the city pretty effectively for a while, and they had to call in, well, they didn't have to, but they did call in soldiers, right, militia from Philadelphia. The police in Pittsburgh actually refused to police the strike because they agreed with the strikers, right? As police sometimes do, right? Police can also say, I refuse to do this task for the elites. And sometimes they do, but it's very easy to replace them. They frequently do, at least individuals do, and sometimes groups of them do refuse to do these tasks. But when they do, they can always find somebody else to step in and be the new police, and they do. But other uses that police have been put to historically, during the progressive era, they're put in to patrol and police the immigrant population, particularly Hungarians, where you get honkies, right? Honkies, right? Particularly Hungarians, and Italians, Slovaks, Russians. Those people were seen as a menace to the public safety. They were seen as anarchists, communists, public drunks, right? And they were very routinely brutalized, rounded up, unfairly arrested. If you look at the numbers of people the Pittsburgh police are arresting during the early 20th century, it's very largely these immigrant populations who are arrested for order violations, right? Just very being drunk on the street, resisting arrest, that kind of very familiar kind of arrest. During the Prohibition era, police are used and it's ramped up substantially to police organized crime, which again is racialized both against immigrant populations, particularly Jewish populations, Catholic populations, but also now against Black populations who are more heavily policed during the Prohibition era. During the Civil Rights Movement, right? You have another kind of, new sort of form of menace that the police perceive themselves as controlling, and that takes the form of Black activists, but also white hippies, juvenile delinquents, right? All these people who are undermining and sort of questioning the authority of the current white, largely white elites, right? And then after that, you have the war on drugs, right? Which is, just another iteration, I would say, of the same pattern, that people who are making very serious critiques of social injustices, racial injustices, categorically are being sort of labeled as attached to a social problem, in this case, drug use, and the police are being sort of used to round them up, bring them in, and bring them to heel, right? So the problem with police has always been that they have been assigned to, quote, serve the Lord and the devil jointly, as Brown said, to do so many things that those in power cannot figure out how to do, are unwilling to invest the resources in doing right, or things which should not be done in the first place. They're sent in to do these very delicate tasks with very few real tools other than the threat of violence. And this has always led to acts of police violence, like the murder of George Floyd. Incidents of police brutality stretch steadily back, and a constant strain in Pittsburgh police history, from the shooting of Leon Ford Jr. just a few years ago, to the brutal beating of George Cotton, a mentally challenged young Black man in 1971, to the third degree of the Prohibition era, and we can go on and on and on. There's nothing new or different about police brutality against oppressed classes and minorities. It's how police, it has to be and always is, structurally, right, I think. In part, these acts of violence have always reflected the failings of human nature. As Brown said, quote, while men are men, violations of rules and regulations, as well as of law, must ever be expected. But the nature of the job itself has largely been to blame. The task of policing, of so often being asked to do a job which no one admits they want done, with a very limited and very particular set of tools, by its nature has tended to make police cynical and angry and make their job feel hopeless. It has encouraged police to believe, because it is the logic of their work, that many problems can be solved only by violence. And it has shaped, by what the powerful in society have constantly asked their police to do, what and who police consider a problem. Over time, these qualities of the job has also very likely attracted to the profession of policing a disproportionate number of people who were already cynical, angry, inclined to violence, and familiar with defining certain people as inherently problematic. What can be done? Does history have a lesson for us? And I would say that the lesson that I get from history is that restructuring the force or hiring new men does not tend, and women, does not tend to be very helpful, because the problem is inherent in the tasks that society asks police to do. But I would say, if I wanted to say a couple of very quick suggestions, I would say first, police do need to be given more training and tools on things that are not violence, such as learning to talk and de-escalate. That seems like a logical stopgap measure to me that needs to happen. Secondly, police officers' voices, along with those of the police, need to be heard when they're assigned to impossible tasks. They need to be heard when they grumble, which they always do, about how their job is impossible. People need to say, wait a minute, is your job impossible? Well, that's a really important job. Like how can we make it less impossible, right? And instead everybody's like, oh, policemen like to grumble. And when people who are policed complain about the brutality used against him and the unfairness of it, people need to listen to that and kind of say, oh man, that's not tolerable to us. We don't have the right to not listen to this except for at these rare windows. And then thirdly, of course, as many people are saying, and I think most importantly, much of the work that police currently are tasked with doing needs to be resolved by other means and by other people. Through using tools other than the threat of violence. So, thank you.
You're muted. Try again.
Thank you, Elaine. Can you hear me?
Yes, they can hear you now, Dad.
Okay. Yusef, would you like to jump in now?
I'm about ready to put my head in a hole right now and duck out the conference. Yeah, I mean, Miss Elaine has done such a fabulous job in terms of outlining the origin of the police as an institution and the impossible tasks that they are designed to do. So I'm gonna take these documents that I have here and kind of pick through them so I do not be redundant with some of the things that she said. I begin by saying if an alien race were to put the human race on trial based on our socialization and policing practices, we'd be found guilty of being uncivilized. My original title was Defund or Abolish the Police. Abolish conditions giving rise to the need for policing. Much of what she was saying is she was outlining some of the conflicts that goes on between the groups that have control and the groups that are being controlled. And much of what she said just outlined exactly how that dynamic plays out in the form of policing and resistance to being police. I was especially impressed when she detailed the role that the police played in the Homestead strike or right after the Homestead strike. To begin with, do you know who started the police and why? How have they been used? How fairly, how impartially, whose side are they on? What do we want them to do now in the present, and who decides? Our conversation does not take place in a vacuum. It's connected to and a product of circumstances. I want you to take notes. You have the magic wand. You can fix what you believe to be wrong. Write down your prescriptions, your questions, observations, and criticisms. Below, I have included my own. Let's begin with what we want the police institution to look like and be doing in the community. Each community stakeholder, business, civic, religious leaders, and laypersons should have input in regulating and managing the final policing product. The police work for the community and our greater good. My vision, there's an absence of the need for policing, meaning the eradication of conditions giving rise to policing as we have come to experience it. I would like to marry the practical and doable with the aspirational. Crime-free neighborhoods and set forth specific best practices with the goal of keeping the community safe. This includes, but is not limited to, being safe from violence, theft, over-policing, unwarranted government interference, and abuse. Our job is to legislate what that means, tasking the police with executing professionally in the heat of the moment. Business gave birth to the institution of the police as commonly understood today. The function of the police originated in slave-catching patrols, town sheriffs, the Pinkerton detective agencies, just to list a few of the precursors. Let me take this moment, though, to allay the disquiet erupted in several quarters and messaging glee in others. Abolishing the police as an institution is impractical, and for messaging purposes, we need to clean that up. I suggest repurposing, redefining crime, reallocating or redirecting funding. It is not the police, an agency of our system, but the entire system itself that is in need of overhaul. As the world is my witness, the COVID virus crisis has accentuated this incontrovertible fact. However, for purposes of this discussion, I will confine the focus to the criminal justice system, for which the institution of the police is the most visible. The criminal justice system consists of the legislators, that's the lawmakers, the judiciary, they interpret the law and set consequences. The police, they are the enforcers and they do all the seizures. The prison industrial complex is where the penalty is often enforced. The parole and probation departments, which monitor the people who are released from prison. To repurpose the police away from militarization We must redefine what laws they are to enforce and how they are to enforce them. Now, with just a little backdrop that kind of supplements what Professor Elaine was just talking about, I want to take us through the racialization specifically as it pertains to African Americans. Black codes and the redemption movement. After losing the Civil War and being granted amnesty, Southern whites crushed democracy, Reconstruction, embarking upon a reign of terror and instituted a racial caste system in the South. With Northern collusion, accommodation, and direct participation, slavery, by another name, was reinstituted. Redemption was an organized effort by white merchants, planners, businessmen, and politicians that followed Reconstructions. Redeemers employed vicious racist violence and state legislation as tools to prevent Black citizenship and equality promised under the 14th and 15th Amendments. Here's how it worked. Black men, and sometimes women and children, were arrested and convicted for crimes enumerated in the Black codes, state laws, criminalizing petty offenses and aimed at keeping free people tied to their former owners, plantations, and farms. The most sinister crime was vagrancy, the crime of being unemployed, which brought a large fine that few Blacks could afford. Black convicts were leased to private companies, typically industries profiteering from the region's untapped natural resources. As many as 200,000 Black Americans were forced back into backbreaking labor in coal mines, turpentine factories, and lumber camps. They lived in squalid conditions, chained, starved, beaten, flogged, and sexually violated. They died by the thousands from injury, disease, and torture. And in the decades that followed, a tough on crime politics with racist undertones produced, among other things, harsh drug and mandatory minimum sentences that were applied in racially disparate ways. The mass incarceration system exploded, with the rate of imprisonment quadrupling between 1970s and today. Now, a lot of that I quoted from, specifically from the research done by Miss Beth Daly. Pennsylvania went from 7 prisons to over 30 during that particular period of time. How drugs became illegal. In 1914, the Harrison Narcotics Act was the first step in making drugs illegal. Structural racism played a pivotal role in passing the laws that followed. In every instance, the virtue of the white woman was extolled and used as the reason to criminalize drugs. With cannabis, it was the Mexican sexing the white woman, opium the Chinese, and cocaine the Negro. The infamous Harry J. Anslinger created the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and testified in several forums where he remarked, "This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes. Reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men." The legislature. I suggest decriminalization of all citizen activity that is not violent. Sale and use of drugs, prostitution, gambling, moonshining, end all economic incentive to sell drugs. Offenses defined as violent would continue to be murder, assault, arson, rape, armed theft, and kidnapping. With the exception of murder, limit the penalty to 10 years, with murder being up to 25 years, and a hearing to determine whether you can be safely reintegrated. Injured parties should be able to participate in binding diversion and reconciliation. There should also be jury sentencing. There should also be, jury sentencing. For all other offenses, I would impose civil penalties, fines, community service, social restrictions, no partying or public events, house arrest without dessert, go to your room. I would include public shaming and asset forfeiture, most especially for corporate fraud and environmental devastation. The legislature should enact retroactive legislation decriminalizing most nonviolent offenses and release all offenders who qualify and can be released safely. The judiciary. A conviction of codified criminal offenses should result in jury community sentencing with guidelines established by the legislature. Those guidelines should include provisions for victim input and sentence recommendation. The guidelines should also permit forgiveness and an opportunity for victim offender reconciliation. The police. The officer corps should be drawn from and reside in the community they are responsible for policing. There should be community oversight over the police with subpoena power and the power to fire. The police should be specifically trained to respond to crime as redefined above. They should also be trained in de-escalation techniques and best practices employed when discharging their duty. The police should not be involved in traffic stops, domestic disputes, mental health or drug addiction crises. The police as an institution should be demilitarized. There should be a separate special police task force armed to deal with armed conflict, international or internal terrorist attacks, and or hostile situations. To reduce injury and serious bodily harm resulting from possible civilian-police confrontation, common sense gun laws should be enacted. All military-style weapons should be outlawed. Citizens do not need military weapons to hunt or protect their family and home. Prisons. In all private prisons, in all economic incentives to lock people up, in all dehumanizing practices within the prison. Prisons should be used as a last resort to ensure community safety. Only violent offenders and the most egregious cases of nonviolent antisocial behavior should qualify for incapacitation. Prisons should not end the humanity of the person incapacitated. Prisons should offer the opportunity to develop the skill sets that were missing, which led to the behavior the prisoner was sentenced for. Parole and probation agencies. Probation or parole should operate to the benefit of the offender. These employees should assist with reintegration, housing, employment, and the continuation of treatment plans developed by staff in prison or probation experts. Stringent revocation procedures should be in place where only violent and potentially violent behavior qualifies for re-imprisonment. We, as a community, should not treat our fallen citizens worse than we treated Civil War traitors, Nazi war criminals, Klansmen, and other racist murderers who ended Reconstruction with neck-breaking terrorism. I conclude by saying what my brother said, we are better than this. That was the Honorable Elijah Cummings. We are better than this.
Yusef, thank you so much. Okay, our next panelist is going to be Matt Schneirov.
Matt, do you want to unmute yourself?
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I feel like I'm in the same place as Yusef was when he started, which is that these presentations by Elaine and Yusef are so good, so phenomenal that I just wonder how I can add to it, but I will try. Norma's saying I can't add to it. Okay, all right. I'll give it my best shot though. I do have a. While I agree with both of our previous presenters, I have a slightly different focus. So I'm going to It's kind of a personal view, but I hope it's backed up by research and data, and it is, in fact. I want to say a little bit about why I think some of the police reforms, while helpful, that people have talked about, are not enough. And it's useful to begin to think about the demands for dismantling, defunding, and in a certain sense, abolition. I kind of defined that the way Yusef has defined it. It's a useful place to start, even as we talk about reform. So I'm going to get into this a little bit. Do police reforms work, and are new ones likely to be effective? What kinds of police reforms are most likely to be effective? What about more radical approaches like defunding, dismantling, and abolition? The intractability of the problem of police violence 50 years after the Civil Rights Revolution and structural racism in the criminal justice system is illustrated by the continued police violence even after the mass demonstrations we all have been witnessing all over the world, but certainly in the United States, over 400 cities in the United States. One might think, one might have hoped that the police across the country would be especially careful given the heightened mistrust between police and African Americans after Floyd's murder, and given the increased scrutiny. But instead, we've seen, as discussed in a recent New York Times column, police driving vehicles into crowds, dragging drivers out of cars, vandalizing cars, assaulting an elderly man, pepper spraying peaceful protesters, shooting rounds of non-lethal weapons at journalists, causing serious injuries, beating peaceful protesters, using tear gas, even though in a pandemic it might cause the virus to spread more rapidly. The tear gas, by the way, was used in an unprecedented way in 98 cities. Then there's what happened last Friday in Atlanta that we all know about by now. Rayshard Brooks, who had been sleeping in his car at a Wendy's takeout line, was shot in the back and killed after an altercation. And by the way, the officer who killed Rayshard had just completed 9 hours of de-escalation training. These are big topics. Yet again, I don't pretend to be an expert, but I would like to suggest some ways of thinking about these questions and also examining some of the evidence available that might move us in the right direction. The first question is whether police reforms have worked in the past. Both Yusef and Elaine have spoken to that a bit. A good guide to whether the current suggestions might work as well. This time, things are moving fast. New York State, as well as Colorado, have passed a package of police reforms. And as we know, so have many cities too, like Pittsburgh. But we have good cause to be skeptical that these measures by themselves will be enough. The Obama-era reforms sparked by Ferguson that Dan talked about revolved around consent decrees between the Justice Department and various cities with the worst records of excessive police force in minority communities. Justice Department monitoring of police behavior based on evidence of patterns and practices of racial discrimination did not reduce the number of police killings in these cities. New use of force policies in many cities prior to the murder of George Floyd have had only modest success in New York City and Chicago, but critics of these measures argue that police unions are sure to undermine these reforms as they have elsewhere. In Minneapolis, there have been a series of police shootings of unarmed Black and Native American men, leading to an 18-day occupation of a police station in 2015, and a series of mass protests since 2015. Despite a reform-minded mayor and city council and new police oversight and accountability measures, the problem of police violence and misconduct continues, as we all know too well. Between 2007 and 2017, the city paid out $2.1 million to settle misconduct charges against police in the 3rd precinct where George Floyd was killed. Scores of charges that police filed were dismissed due to what judges called, quote, outrageous police conduct, unquote, and prosecutors have dropped charges due to illegal searches. The police in the 3rd Precinct are notorious in Minneapolis for their, quote, aggressive tactics, most of which are directed not at violent criminals, but suspects of nonviolent low-level crime. In other words, what happened to George Floyd seems to be an extreme example of very typical police behavior in this district, behavior that years of reform did not touch, reforms like body cams and de-escalation training. The continuation of police shootings of unarmed men, various kinds of police misconduct in minority communities, as well as the shockingly low rate of clearing serious crimes, led the Minneapolis City Council to express support for dismantling the department. And dismantling typically refers to doing away with the department as it is constituted and rebuilding a new one. And I'll talk about that later. So why do we have reason to be skeptical that more reforms will matter much? Apologies to Norm here because I'm going over some ground that he knows way more than I do, but I'm just going to touch on it. I think there are at least 2 factors. Police unions, Dan has just touched on this a little bit, such as fraternal orders of police and police benevolent associations and others, some of which are in the AFL-CIO, some are not, some are independent. As well as police training and culture. Those 2 factors are obstacles to reform. Let's begin with unions. Many, perhaps almost all police unions are aggressive advocates for an almost total lack of accountability. A couple of exceptions in California recently, but they're the only that I have heard of, for circumventing consent decrees and rules, for collective bargaining agreements that keep charges of police misconduct secret, for defending officers charged with serious crimes, as is now the case with the George Floyd murder. The Minneapolis Police Union hasn't expressed any regrets, hasn't made the slightest criticism of police conduct. And for opposition to even the mildest and most timid of reforms. They oppose independent review and monitoring of police behavior, as with civilian review boards and special prosecutor laws. Even when police are fired for misconduct, they can be reinstated by arbitrators as mandated by collective bargaining agreements. Most of these fraternal order of police and police benevolent association locals express little interest in social justice or combating racism. Recent surveys show that the vast majority of white police don't believe these things even exist, in contrast to the broader white population. There seems to be a gap here between even white police and the broader white population. In fact, a recent survey, 2016, shows that on a range of issues, white police are much more conservative than the larger white population. That gap has increased recently due to the change in white attitudes about racism and systemic racism because of the George Floyd murder. White police and union members especially are more likely than non-police whites to say that anti-Black discrimination is not a major problem and to think that Black people are more violent than white people. These unions also make large donations to politicians that oppose police reforms and aggressively oppose candidates who are pro-police reform, labeling them as, quote, soft on crime. Black Lives Matter activists are routinely labeled as terrorists or more recently communist terrorists, as with the New York union leader. In short, any new rules that prohibit certain forms of police behaviors like chokeholds or require behaviors like such as wearing body cams have to be enforced. Police unions in St. Louis, Minneapolis, New York, Chicago, and elsewhere have been clear about their disdain for these measures. Expelling these unions from the AFL-CIO does not seem feasible, since many members of these unions are not themselves police, and many police locals are independent, not in the AFL-CIO. So other measures need to be considered. One change that's already happening in some municipalities is that cities will continue to negotiate with police unions on matters of pay and benefits, but refuse to negotiate on management operations and decisions. I honestly don't know whether that's likely to work or not. A lot's been written about police training and culture. Norm has devoted his career, much of it, to writing about this and working on it as an activist. While this is changing slowly for the better, and a number of great examples we could talk about, including the work being done right here in Pittsburgh with a Holocaust Center and Inside Out and so forth. I'll let Norm discuss that. By and large, police training, as we know, follows a military model. Recruits practice drill formation, boot camp-like relationships with instructors, and of course, uniforms, military fatigues. There's research that demonstrates that the use of military equipment in policing, purchased under the 1038 Defense Department program, has no measurable effect on crime reduction, but does correlate with higher rates of officer-involved shootings. In Black urban neighborhoods, most white police begin with racist attitudes, considerably worse than whites who are not police, according again to the 2016 survey. The police code of silence that prevents anyone from informing superiors of serious misconduct emerges out of and reinforces an in-group solidarity paired with often an intense out-group hostility. The use of cell phones by everyone today is making this code of silence and in-group solidarity much less effective, but we see its continued presence even after the mass protests surrounding the murder of George Floyd. We all know of what happened with police officers involved in the assault on the 75-year-old protester in Buffalo, who originally said he tripped and fell, only to discover that a video showed up that showed something very different. The police union in Buffalo was responsible for organizing the mass resignation of officers from the special unit involved in this incident, and police unions in general are central to enforcing some of the more toxic aspects of police culture. We know this not just from opinions like my own, but from ethnographic research on police, such as the research that Norm's done, but also the work of former police officers who have talked about their experiences, scores of them. But to say that reforms have been tried in the past and have either not worked or had only modest success is not to say they're not worth the effort. It's a place to start, but not finish. Reforms that don't rely on voluntary compliance by the police have the best chance of changing police behavior eventually. Making it easier to fire bad cops, harder for other departments to rehire them is one such reform. Making it easier to prosecute police in various ways, including the appointment of an independent prosecutor who does not work with the police on a daily basis, is another. Mayor Peduto's call to amend Act 111 would also make a difference, I think. This proposal would limit what a labor arbitrator can do to modify disciplinary penalties, as well as limiting the scope of bargaining over disciplinary procedures. Peduto also proposes requiring the reporting of all uses of police. The latter are proposed reforms that require state legislative action, and that's a tall order in the state of Pennsylvania and in some other states as well. Ending qualified immunity so that officers can be sued is another useful measure, as is making public records of police misconduct. Also, the very beginning of a change in the police philosophy from broken windows, which led and continues to lead to over-policing of minor offenses, to community policing may go part of the way in confronting toxic police culture. But after all of that is said, I still believe that we need to discuss some of the more radical proposals seriously. Defund, dismantle, and abolish, which are unfortunately squishy terms that can be misinterpreted in many ways, especially the last one, abolish. These proposals force us to go back to first principles, to consider what systemic racism is, and to confront the fact, as Dan said, that the problem we are facing is a national emergency. We just don't have any more time. We can no longer tolerate the status quo. Considering these other options forces the rest of us who may not be immediately impacted to understand that systemic racism requires systemic solutions. So let's begin with dismantling. The Minneapolis City Council voted its intent to dismantle the department after declaring that, quote, incremental reform has failed, an assertion that is surely correct if one looks at a wide range of data. Mayor Frey, a supporter of reform since taking office in 2008, has tightened rules requiring police to wear body cameras, barred police from attending bulletproof warrior training, but many police attended anyway through the union. At the same time, he opposed investing in community-based public safety programs, as well as the city council vote to dismantle the current department. But a supermajority on the city council pointed to an abysmal rate of clearing violent crimes, especially rape. 22% of rape cases are cleared in Minneapolis. And then there's the aggressive policing of minority communities like the 3rd District in Minneapolis. Almost all of the abuses in these precincts involve low-level violent crimes, as I mentioned earlier. Some of these recent abuses involve the use of anal searches conducted at the precinct headquarters. Others involve the kicking of handcuffed suspects in the face, one of whom did serve a prison sentence for that. That is, one officer served a prison sentence for that. Pistol whipping suspects, sexual assaults on women accused of prostitution. The killer of George Floyd worked in this precinct, which is important to note since violent assaults on residents that fell short of murder was a common occurrence in the 3rd precinct. Overall, while 40% of residents of Minneapolis are people of color, 74% of all police cases that involve force involve people of color. Use of force rates in the entire city have actually gone up since 2016, about the beginning of the latest police reform period. When we look at all of this, it's hard to be satisfied that reforms are enough. And I would add here, not every city is Minneapolis, and we do have to take into account differences, and that's important. So it turns out that dismantling has been successfully tried in one department in California and another in Camden, New Jersey. I learned from Elaine that it's been done in Pittsburgh a number of times, a long time ago. In 2013, Camden was facing a police crisis due to a murder rate 18 times higher than the national average and excessive use of force complaints. They decided to dissolve the existing department and reconstitute a county-wide force in its place. Most members of the former Camden department were rehired, but only after completing a 50-page application, retaking psychological tests, and going through an interview process. The newly constituted department put many more officers on the street on a regular basis, instituting a version of community policing, and eliminating the older way of gauging police effectiveness only by arrests or tickets. Police culture began to change as the chief emphasized the role of police as guardians and not warriors. During 2019, excessive force complaints in Camden went down to 25 from a high of 67 in 2012. Among other things, the chief of the newly reconstituted force said that police need to earn the consent of those they police, and that there is a need to invest in programs other than policing, which will have a great positive impact on police safety. So here's a quote from that Camden the chief of the Camden Police Department. Quote, "Look, I would have traded 10 cops for a boys and girls club, but the system needs to change as far as having police respond to incidents such as mental illness. Police are not equipped. They are not trained. They're not specialized in that, but yet it continues to get delegated to them, making the job of police much harder." I would add here that nationally, half of police shootings involve someone with a mental illness or disability. So the beauty of dismantling is that you can begin to tackle the problem of toxic police culture, decertify unions if necessary, fire problem police, dismantle problem police units, and perhaps more importantly, use fewer police for problems that are nonviolent and might be handled by experts in mental health, as well as social workers, mediators, and other unarmed personnel who have ties to the community. Imagine what might have happened in Atlanta last Friday if someone saw Rayshard Brooks asleep in his car at the Wendy's takeout line, and instead of calling 2 armed police, 2 social workers showed up. Brooks wasn't driving his car and was in no danger. It was no danger to anyone. Cars were already beginning to go around Brooks's car in the Wendy's line, so no one was even inconvenienced in terms of getting their takeout orders. No one needed to die, and as it turned out, Rayshard's sister lived only 4 blocks away. He was asking for a ride home. So in a largely civil discussion for 40 minutes, he just wanted to either walk home or get a ride home. From what I've read, the demand to, quote, abolish the police, and here I have read a few things, but not everything, is a version of these same themes. Not abolish tomorrow, next week, next month, or even next year. As I see it, the demand to abolish the police is an exercise in a political imagination. Imagine investing in what we've spent years defunding. So we've already experienced and experimented with defunding everything else since the 1980s. So we're only beginning to talk about defunding the police. So imagine investing in what we've spent decades defunding in public schools, treatment for people with mental illness and addictions, anti-poverty programs, investments in working class and poor neighborhoods. Imagine sensible gun control, guaranteed annual incomes, health insurance for all, combating racial segregation in housing, and providing affordable housing. Might that lead eventually to a small demilitarized police force that has the consent of those they police? Someday police will live in the same community as those they police, and we will rely more on social workers and mental health professionals rather than armed police. If that's what we mean by abolition, then I'm all in favor of it.
Yes.
Thank you, Matt.
Sure.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to mix it up a little bit, and I'm going to ask Norm Conti to go on now. Are you ready to go, Norm? Okay.
Hello, I don't have anything formally written, but if I was gonna title this, I would call it I Continue to Fail and Hurt People. In 2009, as we already talked about, there was the shooting in Stanton Heights where Paul Shulo was killed, murdered along with 3 other police officers. Paul was 6 weeks younger than I was and am, or whatever. Those of us who've gotten to know his parents just adore them. I didn't pay much attention to that, to be very honest with you, when it didn't happen. I didn't know Paul was a Duquesne alumni. I was concerned with getting tenure and keeping my job at Duquesne, which is a reasonable thing to do. But then in 2012, Leon Ford was shot and paralyzed in the city by the police, or by a police officer. And I didn't pay much attention to that either, because I had just gotten tenure and I was trying to figure out what to do next and how I was going to pay the bills. In 2013, we formed a think tank at the prison with men who were committed to trying to create a different way to train police that would help them to see things better, but see things differently. I've been studying policing for over 20 years. And I address policing from a social problems perspective, where I consider the problems that police respond to, the problems that they cause, and the problems that they suffer from. Just, they cause problems, they respond to problems, and they suffer from problems. Just like every one of us in our own lives, it's just at a different scale. In 2014, we had the first day for learning and speaking out after Ferguson. I met Lenny along the way, who will be next. I met Leon along the way. Earlier that year in 2014, we had an event on campus with the guys we work with in prison. And I was at a community meeting at WESA, and Leon was there in this very a big wheelchair, automatic, because he was still in such an early stage in his recovery, and his father was there, and I saw them. I didn't really know the story, but it was just like, wow, there's that, just seeing his presence and being in the room and having no idea who he was, but you know, imagining things the way I probably imagined them. So I met him when my wife had a class that he visited on campus, and she was just destroyed by meeting him, and the story really affected her. I was able to get to meet him through a few campus events, and we talked on Lenny's show. I invited him to the first Day for Learning and Speaking Out. And what I wanted to do was, I wanted to have an event where I brought in the chief of police, Cameron McClay at the time. Remember his sign. Cameron's, I think he's just taken the job as chief of police in Seattle, where he'll be paid $250,000 a year. So I wanted to have him, I wanted to have Leon on a panel together at this, and I wanted to give the Paul Schulo Award to our students with Paul Schulo's parents, sort of bring everyone together, get this dialogue between Leon and the police started. I had originally asked, those of you that know me will see the humor in this. I had originally asked the chief if he'd come to the Paul Schulo Award event. He said yes. Along the way, I had that, hey, we should have Leon Ford there too. So I asked Leon to come, and a few days before, I texted the chief saying, you know, Leon Ford is going to be on this, and I just wanted you to know. And he scolded me and chastised me for trying to put him at an event with Leon, and Leon had a case against the city, and Leon was accused of assault on officers. And I tried to, you know, massage it, talk him down, whatever, but he didn't come. And I think we were probably okay somewhat after that anyway. And then there's Mr. and Mrs. Schulo, who are, like Dan said, just the nicest people. They were very upset that I was calling it the Leon Ford Jr. Paul Schulo II panel or something like that, because they didn't want Paul's name to be put next to Leon's name, because that would be an assault on the police. That could hurt the police. The media would twist that and use that against the police. So it's like, here are these two nice old people that remind me of my parents. And I could see that I'd caused them a real thing, right? Real consternation, and I felt terrible, and I understood, and we took Paul's name off of it. And Leon came, and I got to meet him, and it was still pretty great. We worked for another couple years. We got police training Inside Out established. That's a program where we take police recruits into prison to study in a 3-credit college course with men who are incarcerated. And the point of that class is for the men in prison to understand the humanity of the police officers, soon to be police officers, and the soon to be police officers to understand the humanity of the men in prison. And the idea is if we achieve that to whatever extent, it could buy a few seconds here or there on either side of a potentially deadly interaction and save someone's life. And there'll never be a statistic on that. That's never, when the funding agencies want to see our metric, we will never have it. And we'll probably never know. And that's okay, because it's a bigger thing. So we've been humming along with that. We continue to do it. This all happened, and I saw the situation downtown by our campus, right, with a police car on campus, right by where I drive by or walk by all the time. And I thought, everything we're trying to do to get people to see each other as human beings is going up in the smoke of that police car, right? There were police there, young, very young, newish, at least past 4 years, police officers who've been through this training, who've been affected by it, who probably some who weren't. How does the work we've done to create this program, the work we've done with them, stand up in the face of being out there in that mess, right? So the police, new police, in riot gear, in helmets, were getting hit in the head with rocks and bricks. That did happen. There were a number of police officers with concussions as a result of this. We ask police to do an impossible job. We want them to police in a democracy following the Constitution, right? We don't want to pay them any more than we have to, even though a lot of the budget goes, I understand that. We want them to keep us safe, which they can't. And, you know, by the way, don't be racist, even though you are a product of a racist society. And every name or face I see on here, especially my own, you have racism in you. You can't not be a product of this society. You have to have it. It's just, it's foolish to pretend otherwise. So I have friends who are police abolitionists, and they tell me that what I'm doing is wrong because you're propping up a failing institution. You're trying to do something that they're going to use to hold on to some credibility and to use as window dressing, saying, oh, see, we're trying to address these issues, right? And then I have people in the police department who say, you're going to make these recruits soft and they're going to go out on the street and get hurt. And then I have friends on the other side who say, you're going to make these guys in prison think that the police are their friends, and then they're going to get hurt by the police, right? So it's very complicated, and I usually go with the feeling that, well, if I'm making all these people mad, maybe I'm doing something. So then this thing happened, and I so wanted to do something because of COVID-19. We're not doing police training inside out. My friend Tali, who's like a brother to me, and he's on this call here somewhere in the mix probably. His fiance is in the Pittsburgh Police Academy. Because of COVID-19, we couldn't do police training inside out. And so I'm watching all this happen and feeling just useless. And, you know, it was a terrible feeling. So I rounded up the troops. Hey, let's get on Zoom and let's social justice, and we can all be human beings together. And we put this panel together, and this panel was originally called something with the abolish or defund the police. And that was used to hurt people I love who are police officers, right? Look at this guy, you think he's your friend. You think he's on our side. He's not. He's trying to get us to lose our jobs, right? And when I first heard that, it was just like the thing with the Shulo family or other huge mistakes I've made. And I make a lot of mistakes with the police, with people in the community, with guys in prison. And this sort of felt like that again, like, Norm, you shouldn't have let them call this that. You should have known better because you're the Social Justice Association coordinator. I'm not even sure what that is, but I am that, and it's very exciting. And I've done a terrible job so far. Matt's laughing. He agrees, but that's so that's where we are. And it sort of felt like the same thing all over again. The best intentions, right? I had the best intentions, and what I did, because I missed something, right? I missed something, and people got hurt, right? And I don't like the protests. Well, I love the protests, but I don't like what goes on with them that allows the protest to be weaponized against the issues, right? Rioting, destroying police cars, that is counterproductive to the political mission we have here. I love cops. I love guys in prison. I love specific guys in prison and specific cops and the general thing too. It's what we ask the police to do is unfair. The mission we've given them, and you can say, hey, they accepted it, they didn't have to take the job, and that's true, but we gave them the job, right? So this goes back to what Elaine said, what all the prior participants said. We ask them to do this thing that's impossible, right? And if you want to be as critical as the police as you want to be, that's fine, but they're never more than just the edge of the knife, the sharpest part, right? What about the rest of the blade, the handle, the hand, the person standing on a mountain of bodies of color who's wielding the knife, right? That's all of us. And so what happens is people on the right in these moments, super supportive of the police, right? The people in power, super supportive of the police. The people on the left We point and we identify all of our racism, right? All the bad things about us, all the wrong thoughts that we have, and we say, see, look at the police, they're racist, right? When we're really saying, see, they're worse. We're not as bad, right? We're less racist than they are. We're not out there kneeling on someone's head. So by saying that I continue to fail and continue to hurt people that I love, we have to be able to look at this in a different way and realize I do that, you do that, the police do that. The guys that are in prison have done that, continue to do that. You know, those of us that do what we do don't usually see putting more people in prison as a solution. So we should try to look at the police in the same way. And I'm probably going over my time, but I don't think any of these policy changes are going to work. I don't think they're going to do a thing. I think that the system wants what it wants. I think the people who are doing this work have to find ways to do what the system wants. And it sounds good. The politicians, the mayor, the governor, they're doing things to try to get people to shut up and vote for them. And thank you. And this wasn't a good talk. You forgive me.
Okay, Norm, thank you so much. So finally, the last person on our panel today is Lenny McAlister. Lenny, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. And number one, first and foremost, I asked to go last because I think that hearing everything that we've heard from all the wonderful people that have spoken provides us an opportunity to hear a lot of different things, from the frustration that people have to sometimes the hopelessness, because we've continuously have been doing this. Just over the last 10 years, we've been in Florida, we've been in Missouri, we've been in New York City, we have been, in California, Ezell Ford. Does anybody remember that name from the earlier part of the 2010s? African-American man that was killed in LA just 6-7 years ago. There's so many names that people forget about this. And so there's the frustration that we're seeing in the street is a lot of hopelessness that this isn't going to get any better. And somebody that I love dearly and I respect mightily, such as Norm Conti, who just sat here and said, and I wrote it down, the policy changes won't work. This is from somebody with a PhD. And a lot of the frustrations that we've heard just on this call are coming from people that have spent decades of their lives investigating data to drive them to a conclusion that they would hope would be better for all of us as a society. But I wanted to go last because I wanted to bring a message of hope, a message that we can move through this, we will move through this, but there are ways that we have to do that. And I'd be more inclined to answer Q&A than go through point by point for 15 minutes. But one of the very first things that I think we have to take in consideration for all of the police officers that are on this call, as well as the activists that are on this call, is that the reforms that we need to keep what I like to call both sides of the badge safe in every interaction between police and a citizen. We want to make sure that the police officer can go home safe and that that citizen is treated innocent until proven guilty. Well, the traffic stop, and I just had to fight a traffic ticket myself just yesterday, to attempted murder or something worse. We have a system that allows for people to go through the courts to be tried by their peers. We don't need police to be judge, jury, and executioner. But just the same, we have to go into each police interaction, not just with apprehension from trends throughout our history as Americans, but also with the innocent until proven guilty, with how the police officer is going to act. Will he or she be courteous? Will he or she follow the directives that they have been taught? Will they treat me with courtesy and I do the same? Each one of these reforms, whether it's some of the stuff that we're seeing come out of Harrisburg that's addressing PTSD with police officers that have been involved in shootings, or some of the accountability measures when it comes to having an open book regarding any type of disciplinary action. That's to keep everybody safe. Let's be honest, there are some people that are protected by unions, whether it's police unions, teacher unions, or other unions, that should not be in that line of work. My dad retired from U.S. Steel, Clairton Works, and he used to tell me about people that would get this close to getting themselves or other people killed, and the union would keep their job. There's a point in time where the union has to look at that individual in the steel mill and say, you're going to get somebody hurt. You're going to get somebody killed. And rather than fighting to keep the job, there might be an effort to graduate that individual to another line of work. Just imagine that with the delicacy of young people's minds when you're starting to talk about schools, but even more so regarding the dynamic when it comes to police-citizen interactions. When you put these type of police reforms in place, these are not punitive against police officers. And we have to be very mindful of our tone. We have to be mindful of how the language is put into the legislation, whether it's a local ordinance or something coming out of the states or something that you're seeing federally. We have to make sure that we are protecting the aspect of who we are, which is constitutional law and order, while at the same time making sure that people that, as part of their job every day, put on a bulletproof vest. You know, most of us don't have to on a regular basis. Those that serve in police forces face it every single time they go to work because they're putting on that vest. Every time they're hearing something on the radio, they have to face that, whether it's very intentionally or something that's in the back of their mind. We acknowledge that as we continue to pursue the reforms that we need, but we have to make sure that our tone and our results allow for more people to be safe throughout the dynamic of police interactions. So if you look at some of the things that we're seeing coming out of Harrisburg that my colleague Jessica Barnett is also working on with me, and I'm glad that she's on this call, we're looking at things that are going to take that tact. How do we do things that are common sense and constitutional? How do we do things that will keep people safe and allow America to work the way it should work, where people are treated fairly, where the disparities that we're seeing between arrests of blacks and whites, that gap is no longer there. That the treatment when it comes to the quoting roughing up of a suspect to police-involved shootings, those disparities are lessened. These are the type of reforms we need to go after, but we have to go after them in a way that understands that both sides of the badge need to be our partners, which is why some of the rhetoric, whether it's the dismantle or disfunded the police, or, you know, we have to back the blue while ignoring some of the facts, those extremes are not helpful. What we would like to come out of this call, moving forward with the Q&A, and then moving forward with tangible, meaningful, and transformational reform are things that will allow us to rebuild the public trust, allow us to keep people safer, and allow us to move past some of the legacy issues that we've been dealing with when it comes to the mistrust between people of color and police. This is a very important time in American history. Young people don't have the hope that they had 50 years ago. You have social media that's inflaming things even more. The world is smaller, and that can make things more incendiary or can make it a lot easier to keep right now. I genuinely believe that we can put the right reforms in place. It will be hard work, but we're going to have to each other and move forward in order to get us to the right frame of mind, but also get us the successes that we need.
Thank you very much, Lenny. Okay, I'm not quite sure how to proceed at this point, but I would like to give, before we go to Q&A from the audience, I'd like to give all the panelists an opportunity to reflect and comment on one another's presentations, if you'd like. Do you want to take a minute and think about it, folks, before you respond?
No, I'll jump in.
Okay.
It kind of leverages what I was just saying, which is those that have done the academic pursuit to investigate the root causes of what we're facing. it is incumbent upon us to work with the policymakers in a way that elevates past the emotions, elevates past the points where we have failed, to bring about tangible things that can transpire. One of the things that I have brought up for years has been the tactic of stop and frisk. And whereas there's an emotional response to why you shouldn't do stop and frisk, and there's a constitutional approach as to why you shouldn't have stop and frisk. And in fact, Norm brought up former Chief McAlister, and I confronted him on my television show in January 2015 on the use of stop and frisk in Pittsburgh, very directly on live television. There's also a way to look at it from an efficiency standpoint, from a data standpoint, and say over 90% of stop and frisk incidences do not turn up a weapon, do not turn up an arrest. Half of the arrests do not turn up a conviction. Less than 2% of them turn up a weapon or drugs. Do we really want to waste police time with a tactic that is only eroding the trust and leads to heightened probabilities of innocent police officers getting shot in the back of the head because somebody's gone off the rails? Something that we have also unfortunately gone through as a tragedy over the last several years. We could talk about other tactics, other things from a data-driven perspective that allows people to understand objectively why we're pushing for certain reforms. That's incumbent upon us, because if we're not the calm voices that are visionary, the voices that are the loudest will be the ones driving the agenda, and we don't know where that's going to go. That might be off a cliff.
I'd add to that, listening to the prior speakers, they mentioned that, you know, there are people have been talking, the police have been saying things for years. This goes back to Lane's all the way at the beginning, and it kind of runs through them. The police have been saying things for years, decades. The Black community has been saying things for decades. We have to listen to both of those groups and build solutions that are for everyone.
Yusef.
Well, for me, it's always structural. We have the reins of control. And since we have the reins of control, we need to know how to employ them. And the reins of control is the legislative mandates, what the law is. Take the police out of a lot of the conflict situations, the police and the community. Just imagine, if drugs is not criminalized, how many people would not be in confrontational situations with the police? And I'm talking about the seller and the dealer. I mean, the dealer and the consumer. Just think what that would do to our society if we didn't do no other reform but that one. Eliminate the economic incentive for a young person to get involved with drugs in the first place. We got drug companies that give drugs for every ailment that we could think of. Just add one more. You know what I mean? My mind is in disarray and I need to go on a trip where I could relax. You know what I'm saying? Just add that to the mix, make it $1 a shot or something like this here. Now you done killed all of the cartels and the murders that go along with that in an instant. And every child that's sitting around there watching a young person, 14, 15, 16 years old, selling dope, driving a car that he don't even have a license for, wouldn't have that as a model to emulate. When he sit there and he say, you know, I'm struggling, my mom is out, you know, I'm coming up in this poverty, and my man is showing me a way out. All I got to do is duck the stick up man, duck the police, and don't let everybody come cop short, and I can make a couple dollars. Well, I'm 14 years old. That is, I'm a CEO. I jump right in the mix. You eliminate all of those circumstances, macro circumstances that micro decisions would plug into and continue all these conflicts that we're talking about. 75% of the conflicts between the Black, brown, and poor communities that come around, that evolve out of drugs, will be eliminated in an instant. So I think structurally like that, all the way across the board for every institution. I don't want to monopolize the time, but I did want to make that comment. We control it, and we need to take control of it, as opposed to letting corruption come in with their own, when I say corruption, I got my own agenda and I can throw my weight around because I can hire all the politicians to write legislation that will allow me to go ahead and just pollute the water with all of the stuff. It's cheaper for me to do that. Don't let them bully us like that there to be able to have control over the machinery of government. And we'll be able to enact common sense laws that served our greater good and not just some special interest.
Thank you, Yusef. Matt, Elaine, would you like to respond?
Go to Q&A, it's dropping off.
Well, just very briefly, Lenny talked about needing calm voices that are visionary. And Yusef talked about the importance of thinking structurally. So I think they're both comments that are consistent with some of the things that I tried to say, but not as eloquently. So the value of thinking about these more radical demands is that they are visions. Implementation is, I don't know, it's going to be extremely difficult for any of that, maybe impossible, but it's important. So my main point is we need to think about policing in terms of systemic racism, and these demands force us to do that and get out of a rut of this constant reform crisis, back and forth and so forth, and we can't do that anymore. So it's kind of what I was getting at. I appreciate the comments.
Okay.
I guess I also appreciated everybody's comments, and particularly I felt, even though maybe everybody wouldn't agree that their paper was hopeful, I really liked Lenny's comment at the end. We have no choice. As history rarely gives us reason to hope, but all we can do is stumble forward with, in hope. So I think, that's, I'm excited to do that, though it might be really dumb. So.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, so we have some time left. We have quite a bit of time left, actually. So I invite the audience to type questions, comments that I can share with the panelists now. And I'd like to, if Farouk Weideman is Farouk out there somewhere?
Yeah, he's there.
Farouk, if you don't mind, I'd really like to hear from you. Have you got any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I'm here. I listened to everyone. It was so informative. Most of the things we talked about, I've read and did some studying on and have some ideas and feelings about. But as I said this morning in our meeting, the reason we're at this place is about racism. And I don't think racism is the cause. The cause is power. And until we take away the power of those in power through the laws, through policies and procedures, because that's what makes people racist. When they have the ability to control others. And when you control others, you feel above them. You feel better than them. It's human nature. That's part of, we talk about the survival of the fittest. But that puts us all the way back to animal. And I say that just in a short way. I talked about it a lot more this morning. And I say it to say that until we decide as a people, and until we can get the legislatures and the politicians to follow us, those that care to change some of these procedures. Professor Schwarzenegger, I'm sure I'm pronouncing his name right, but he said it, that we have to take away some of the power of the FOP. We have to take away some of the power of the people that make the laws, that protects the police and keeps them being able to do what they do. You know, we take it all, I took it this morning, you take it all the way back to the slave master. He could take you out back, whip you, and kill you if he wanted, to make a point, or just because he had a bad day. That kind of power makes you feel like God. And as long, and that kind of power also makes you hate, because you feel contempt for people that you can do that to. The people that get that kind of reaction feel contempt for themselves. So, and that goes in such strong forms as that, or to when people that, guys in prison, for another example, that tell on people. I've seen some of the strongest guys get broken do that. They become very weak men. The police, the guards, feel much stronger and in much more control when they break that strong. And have much more contempt for him and people like him. And it's part of how we learn to hate, is that power dynamic that we're all caught up in. And until we decide, I know we can't adjust that in one fell swoop, but we can take, in this case, and what we're trying to change right now is that police will quit shooting young black men or people that are powerless until we can take away the powers of those unions. We cannot, we're not going to be able to change stuff. You know, we can try. And like Elaine says, we have to try, but we need to recognize that that is where the power is. And that is where, that's what the police don't want to let go of, because they're will be the underdog, will be the one taken advantage of. You know, but we have to some way save some people's lives. Unless we do, my 2-year-old great-grandson will be talking about this in 30 or 40 years. They'll be going through some more of this in some other way that I can't figure out. Just as in 1968, I couldn't have figured out where we'd be right now. But I see that we're still in the same place. You know, I protested and rioted in the streets in 1968. And here we are 50 years later, 50 plus. And it feels the same way. Yeah, there's other races and people, and there's more women, and there's more young white kids that are out there with us, but it's still the same feeling. And it's still, and what's happened over those years is the power became greater. You know, now the police are getting away with killing young black men like it's nothing. Like Lenny said, we can't even remember half of the names. I can't keep up with all the names. And so, to me, at this time, at this point in time, we have to adjust the power dynamics, and that's taking away the power of these police unions and changing some of the laws that allow them not to be sued. You know, if a few of them start losing their homes, not just their jobs, because they're not going to jail for it, but if they start losing the things they care about, they'll quit doing that. I mean, it's just plain as the nose on your face. They will quit doing it. If these things change, then things will change. And I'm sorry for taking so much.
Well, thank you, Farouk. By the way, for those of you who don't know him, Farouk Weideman is a scholar and an activist associated with the Elsinore Bennu think tank, which Norm founded a few years ago. Thank you, Farouk.
Don't let him get away with saying it like that, Farouk.
Okay, how am I supposed to say it, guys? Tell me.
Who founded it, Farouk?
Huh?
Say it, Norm.
Farouk always likes to point out that he is a founding member of the think tank.
Ah,
Thank you.
Forgive me. Forgive me.
That's what we yeah.
Okay.
And Norm's greatest supporter for Police Inside Out.
Yeah.
I took a lot of flack about supporting him, as I have and still do. And
it's
still
funny
get
because
flack.
none of that group thought the program would ever happen. And then when it did, they told me that. And I was like, well, why were you sitting here with me for 3 years if you didn't think this was really going to work? And for the guys inside, I understood they're in prison, but I don't understand why Elaine drove from Mount Lebanon down to the north side if maybe she had her reasons.
I would like to hear from Elaine again, and I'd also, after Elaine's done, perhaps Jessica Barnett would like to speak, and Lenny, your colleague Jessica, if she's on with us.
So Elaine, we have our first audience question from Nathan. He comments on the relationship between policing and American history, the Second Amendment and the Black Codes. If you could address that, and please keep the questions coming.
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. In fact, it's such a great question that it almost answers itself. The main thing I want to say is so true. All of that is so true. And I mean, the one thing I would add to it is that there tends to be this sense that we could either see things in terms of race, or we can see things in terms of class. I've never seen the reason why we can't do both at once. And so I think there's a dual origin of police. Police emerge in the United States both out of the suppression and exploitation of Black people in slavery and immediately after slavery, and also out of the very passionate desire to suppress the rights of labor on the parts of capital. I don't see those two things in competition, particularly since Black people very frequently are also exploited as laborers by the same capitalists. So it's both and, but all three of those comments are very well taken. Thank you.
Oh, you're mute. Try again.
Jessica, would you like to respond to any of the comments that have been made recently? I guess not. No. I'm looking.
Looks like she's busy.
Sorry. All right. Well, let's see now if we got another.
Just ask more questions.
Any more questions or comments from the audience? Okay.
Can I ask a question? I'm going to go around the horn and ask people that are in the chat room to respond to this, and maybe they don't want to necessarily just put it out there, but after hearing us speak and after what we've gone through over the last several weeks, have people become more optimistic that change is going to come, or less optimistic? Because there's two sides to see it. There's one side that says, there was just an article that was released over the last couple of days that said, in fact, it was Tony Norman in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that said, Aunt Jemima survived Jesse Owens, Muhammad Ali, the civil rights movement, and the first Black president, but couldn't survive this moment in 2020. So maybe things are going to change in a very radical way for some improvements. But then the flip side is, in the shadows of George Floyd, we had the shooting in Atlanta just 7 days ago. So how are people feeling about this? Are they looking at this as a very powerful moment that's indicating that things are never going to change, or things are finally going to change?
Excellent question, Lenny. Thank you. Could we get some audience response to Lenny's question? Anyone like to speak?
Yeah, put the whiskey down and answer some questions.
I would like to speak to that. Dan, I'd like to chime in. Lenny, I think that this is probably the most optimistic time that we've lived in. I think that particularly this younger generation has had it. They've had it with the systemic racism. They've had it with the power structures that will not change the system. And it may take some time, but these young kids are, I think, committed to this cause. And I see it in my classes, and they are the most open and honest and caring and generation that we've produced. America's produced in a very long time, and it makes me very, very optimistic. Unfortunately, I think I think Farouk was right when he's talking about power structures. And unfortunately, the people in power never willingly give up power. It has to be wrestled from them. They have to be forced to give up that power. And you see that that's part of this movement right now. And sometimes that's destructive, and you know, sometimes it's less destructive, but it's still interruptive. And hopefully, you know, we can use the tactics that, you know, perhaps the civil rights leaders used and the gay liberation people used in the 70s that and 80s that really made change. It might take some time, but you know, I think that we're on a really good path.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Now, I noticed that I think Taylor Thompson wanted to say something.
Yes, I definitely did.
Please go ahead.
To me, it's tough to be optimistic during this time, because a lot of times I feel like we're preaching to the choir. What I would like to see is the uncomfortable conversations. Like, so let me say culturally, you know, me growing up and you know, I've dabbled on both sides of the fence. And when I started to have legitimate conversations with law enforcement and even sit at tables with them, I got looked at differently from some folks within my community, right? And I didn't care. And I'm talking about from my immediate peer group, where even if I was coming from the police station down in Western Avenue and somebody seen my car pulling out of there, it's like, what are you doing at the police department? You know what I mean? But I was there because I was at the table because I had valuable input and conversation that I wanted to have to change the discussion, change, you know, give some input to these individuals that I felt, you know, what I was talking about could provide value to the conversation. Now, what I'm not hearing and seeing at these tables is other law enforcement folks sitting up and saying, Tylee, when they beat you, I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything, and this is why. So there's been times when I have been beat by police, and police have done things in my community. I mean, and these are things that are on record. And it was never the officer that did it that bothered me. It was the ones that collaborated the report and showed up in court and told the same lie. So it was 6 other officers that told the same lie off of what this one did. I need to hear from those officers to say, this is why I didn't step up at the time. Like, this is why I agreed on a report that I know 90% of it was false. Like, because then they'll be looked at in their peer group differently, the way I was looked at when I came from the police department having legitimate conversations. Like, just me coming from Western Avenue headquarters has my peer group saying, Ty, what are you doing over there? So when these other officers say, you know what? Yes, when Scott Herbert beat Tylee and then put this false report in, and then 4 of us collaborated and showed up in court and said it happened, this is why I did that. Like, until we having that discussion on why these officers continue to collaborate false reports, why they did it, like, and what allowed that space to happen, then we're not really changing anything. Because these are the ones, like, those guys got to become uncomfortable with their peers. Like, I had to become uncomfortable with my peers in the same communities when they see me coming from Western Avenue headquarters. And I didn't care what they thought. I knew that what I had to bring to the table could add value to the conversation. So therefore, I had to have those uncomfortable conversations. And I had to have conversations with them and tell them time and time again, I don't sell drugs. So you can't look at me as a possible snitch, because a snitch has to be a part of what's going on at the time to have valuable information to be considered a snitch. But I knew there was a reason for me to be at that table, and I had to take those hits. And then as time went on, other folks that were my peers said, you know, that's just what Ty's doing. It's in the best interest of the community, and that's what he's doing. Those same officers have to step up and admit that they played a part in collaborating false reports and why they did it. Explain to us why they did it so that we can change that environment that allowed them to continue to collaborate false reports when they knew they were wrong.
Ty, I'm hearing something, knowing you the way I do, I'm hearing if they explained it, you could actually understand it and forgive it easier, right?
Well, to be honest, I've forgiven in so many ways. You know, I forgave the guy who murdered my brother when I came to your graduation down at Western Penitentiary. I forgave the criminal justice system that allowed a woman to be charged with murder of my grandmother and gave her 1 year probation on suspended sentence, which meant she done 0 time. That was in Manchester. So I forgave that criminal justice system. She was found guilty of murder of my grandmother in 1968, and the judge gave her 1 year probation, suspended sentence, right? So I've forgiven those officers already. But when I continue to come to these tables, I don't see them there saying, Tab, we was wrong. I just see them continue to fall in the culture and say, we're having these community relations meeting, you know what I mean? And so that's why I know when I go, I mention the names. When I say the names, I know y'all know the names because these are your peers. So how did you let Scott over? How did you let Scarpini have these false reports? The only reason Scarpini had to retire within the last 5 years is because he collaborated a false report, and it was at a car wash on Brighton Road, and the car wash happened to have everything recorded. And Lou Gentile can tell you about it because I didn't know, but Lou Gentile done the investigation, and everything that Scarpini had reported was false because the cameras showed that his whole report was false. Now, guess what his punishment was? He had to retire. Not that he committed a crime because he done this under oath, and he done it under oath plenty times. But he was given the ability to retire, you know, and collect his pension because he lied that time and he lied many times before. Like, that's unacceptable because they're supposed to be held to a higher standard. We're not having those conversations. And then when I went to the DAs and said, well, listen, because I had a case with Scarpini and 90% of his report was lies. So I happened to go to one of the first district attorneys and said, listen, a friend of mine that's in jail for 10 years, that Scarpini and him said that he committed aggravated assault on 4 officers. Those were all lies. You know, we should be reviewing this case. He said, well, I didn't review his case because other officers collaborated Scarpini's story. So therefore, he didn't feel like he needed to revisit Scarpini's case because other officers collaborated the lie. So unless we're having conversations, if people are willing to step up, and you can give them immunity, whatever, but they need to step up and say, this is why I did it, and this is what allowed it to continue to happen because we continue to collaborate lies in these court systems. That son my co-defendant away for 10 additional years because he had 4 aggravated assaults on the officers, and they beat him, took him to the hospital, and then gave him 4 aggravated assaults on the officer. When you can tell an officer has beat someone, they always throw in the language that they reached for my gun. That's a part of the language. They did it with Levance Field, who played for Pitt who played for Pitt University basketball team. When they beat him, they said he reached for his gun, and they beat him. You know, the reach for your gun is the language that they use within the culture that says, oh, if he was reaching for the weapon, you needed to have excessive force to beat him so he wouldn't reach for your gun. This man Levance Field didn't reach for a gun. My co-defendant didn't reach for a gun. It would be the closest thing you would look to as a nonviolent protest as officers are beating him upside his head. And then I remember myself in the bullpen, we were wrong. We were selling drugs. Why didn't they just tell the truth? Like, why didn't they just say they were drug dealers? We caught him with drugs. He resisted. We had to, you know, do what we did under resistance. And then we deal with those charges. I remember being in the bullpen saying, why did they lie? Because we were wrong already. But anyway,
if I could just,
I digress.
Todd,
Yeah.
could I please?
if I could just make an interjection.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, all I was going to say
I
is
just
that,
want to make one quick comment. Okay, go ahead.
come on,
Go ahead.
come on, my long-winded friend.
I just want to make one comment. It's all what you just said was what I was talking about. All of them had reason to lie, and that was to protect the blue line, and that was to protect their job and to keep their place in that system. And if they went and did what you said and were honest and did the right thing, they'd be somewhere at another job and ostracized and maybe beaten somewhere by some other police themselves. And they knew that, because that's the things, those policies that are unwritten are also taught outside of the classroom, in academies and everywhere else, and in the police station and in the squad car, and when they go to the bar after work and drink. Those things are drilled in that this is what gives us our power. This is how we hold on to our power. This is what we got to reinforce in our laws, in our procedures, in our union. And these are the things we can't let the politicians take away in the law, because these are the things we need to do. And until we can take that away, because there's probably some of them guys that didn't want to lie, that didn't want to support the lie, but it was either that or their neck. And how many of us will give up our necks? Yeah, we can forgive when it don't hurt us, and take our jobs and our employment away and our livelihood, you know, or maybe even some of our health, when it's just a thing that we have to do in our hearts to feel better. I forgave the people, the men that killed my son. I don't even remember their name. I ran across somebody that's a family member, and I heard the name, and it finally came back to me, but I'm trying to forget it again. But that's for me. Those men need to be able to do what you said, because I bet a dime to a dollar one or two of them wanted to be honest and tell the truth. Because I don't believe all the police are bad. No way. But the rules, the procedures, the policies, the union makes them have to be bad sometimes. We got to take that away. We got to find a way. And I am hopeful. I believe what Martin Luther King said, that the arc of justice is long, but it bends towards right. And so I believe right now we're hanging on to that right side, and we're bending it a little bit more in this time. And I don't know how far we'll get this thing to bend, but I believe it'll be helpful. And however far we can take it, let's take it. But knowing we can't stay from the door that it ain't gonna work, man. We're gonna make something work.
Well, one thing I want to make sure everyone gets real quick, and then let Yusef go. But Tylee is the furthest thing from anti-cop that you could get, even though he was out doing what he was doing when he was younger. And I saw the excitement and the joy in his face and his fiance's face as she started her journey into the police academy. And I know it's very difficult for him, given his family's history and given what she's dealing with. And we need to all keep them in our thoughts and prayers as we move through this.
The only point I wanted to make in regard to what's been said, well, I'm gonna say 2 points. One, when we're talking about power dynamics, what you're actually talking about is the patriarchal paradigm, where him that got the big stick makes the rules. Simple as that. Your stick ain't bigger than mine, then I'm calling the shots. And the other thing I want to say in terms of the things that were said, that Tylee just spoke on, is we think structurally and we make the law to specifically address whatever concerns we have. And we can do disqualifiers. You cannot protect and serve if you lie. If you're willing to go up there and lie on the witness stand, under God, and it's found out that you lied, that you forfeit the benefits that you get to serve. We have to be strategical like that all across the board with the culture. All the toxic components of the culture, we need to identify them, quantify some regulations, some rules, some statute that addresses that specifically, and just hold their feet to the fire. Back to most of them being good men. A lot of good men do bad things. I mean, we saying that about ourselves. We the quintessential good man that done something absolutely crazy. You know what I'm saying? So we can extend that level of understanding and forgiveness across the board. But what we have to have in terms of institutional protection, the police as an institution is a valued institution that is needed. So you don't throw the institution out with the bathwater. You just don't do that. But what you do is that you surgically apply the structures that you want in place and you don't yield on those.
So I'm going to say this, and I'm going to have to go. And I've enjoyed my time here, and I thank everybody for what they're doing. And I look forward to working with everybody moving forward. I disagree with you, brother. It's not the people that have the biggest stick that make the rules. It's the person that knows how to use their stick the best that ends up winning the fight. And if you look at the civil rights movement of the 20th century, you had a bunch of poor Black people that were disenfranchised, that were under the threat of domestic terrorism regularly, where they were hanging a lot of strange fruit for decades, that ended up showing the world how to push back against the most powerful government in the world. We have seen it time and time again where people have taken the playbook of what American protest is, fighting against the odds and watching David beat Goliath in order to bring about justice in America. Now, we are nowhere near where we need to be, but I need to make sure that people understand that I'm not really concerned about how big and intrusive and bureaucratic government is, because there's always a way to chop it down to size. There's always a way to get justice on the right path and back into our lives at a higher clip. And I'm willing to do that. And I know everybody on this call is willing to do that. And I want all the participants on this call to understand we can't look at the odds and say that they're long odds. We can't look at the history and say it's a deep history. We have to look at justice the whole time and find the results that we're looking for. So I just wanted to say thank you all for having me here. God bless you all. And I look forward to making more and better things happen, not just in some ethereal future, but in the future that starts right now.
Lenny, before you go, put your email address so me and you can continue this conversation. He left already?
I'll get you his email.
Yeah.
Wow, that was fast.
The odds when I say the big stick, I mean the big stick. The fact that we can get individual victories, even group victories, that don't change none of the patriarchal paradigm where the dudes who's calling the shots, all they did was just capitulate sufficiently enough that you didn't galvanize enough forces to change who had the stick. You know what I mean? You weren't gonna have no revolution and put all the people that we talked about who brought the police forward in the first place and took America for Native Americans and accumulated all this wealth. You're not going to just take them and push them to the side. They are flexible enough, they can absorb most of the angst and problems that we have and make changes. Please just don't change who's got the top control. Don't change that. And we'll accommodate just about the majority of the pushes that people will make. And that's what they did with the civil rights movement. And at the same time, that they yielded enough to eliminate the pressure that they was under and just reconstitute it down the line and start doing the same things over again in another form and another facet. Nothing has changed. The people who are at top with the big stick still maintains the big stick. And I don't say don't fight, because if you know anything about my history, you know that I carve out for myself. All of y'all can get down and bow on one knee if that's what you want to do. And I'm going to die standing on both feet. And that's just the bottom line.
All right. If I can just interject here for a second. I'd like to, first of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists who've participated so far and all those who have chimed in along the way. Elaine is left and Lenny is left, so they're no longer able to respond to questions or comment. We've had comments from several people that I haven't been able to convey to members of the panel. In response to Lenny's question before he left, Dina commented that she is more optimistic now. I don't think we're going to achieve everything she writes, everything obviously, but I think we are going to move forward in the right direction, especially if we can get Trump out of office. And I think we're going to look back on 2020 as a year of clarity. That's one of our audience participants. She also writes, I agree with John, we need to change laws and power holders to force people to behave correctly and in time see cultural changes. That's consistent with what we've been hearing from Farouk and from Tylee and also Yusef. So I would like to open the floor up one last time to all the panelists. We haven't heard much from Matt Schneirov recently. Matt, do you want to give us your summation before we wind this thing down?
Well, I don't know if I have a summation, but I've learned a lot from everyone on this panel. I think it was outstanding, and you know, I think maybe one lesson that I've personally gotten out of this, that I have tried to absorb over the past, I don't know, period of time, is that we can't see what's happening now as a in the same way perhaps as we've seen it in the past. We have to, especially white folks like me, we have to feel the urgency just as our brothers have always felt it. And what makes me optimistic, and I guess I'm in the optimism camp, is the data that we have now, the survey showing white people are changing for the first time. The vast majority of whites, it's something like 60%, I don't know the number exactly, believe that structural racism exists and that racism is a serious problem that has to be confronted. That was not the case during the civil rights movement. People, you know, like to say now that everyone loved Martin Luther King. They didn't. And it certainly was not the case with the Black Liberation Movement. The vast majority of white people were terrified by the Black Liberation Movement. But you have now, Amazon has the Black Lives Matter logo. We can make fun of them, and we should, but the fact that they feel they have to have it there to sell products is remarkable. Nobody would have done that with Black Power in the 60s.
Yeah.
So you know, I am optimistic. That's my summation.
Well, if it's all right with everyone, I would like to end on that optimistic note. I'd like to thank all the panelists again, and everyone else who contributed to this discussion. It's been a slice, and I thank you all. And till next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome, you.
You with
Good to see you again.
Extended presentation. Farouk is always trying to curtail my language, say I use too much time, you know what I mean? And I'm mindful of that when I'm in his presence. So just want to keep me in check, just put Farouk's name up there.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
I love you, bro.
So long.
Thanks, Yusef.
All right. Peace, everyone.
Peace.
Take care,
Peace.
Farouk.
Okay, so let's end it.